Cities across the U.S. are seeing a surge in gun violence. In New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo has declared a state of emergency in hopes of curbing the spike in shootings and homicides around the state. He's committed nearly $139 million to create jobs for at-risk youth and bolster the presence of law enforcement in impacted communities. Cuomo also signed new legislation that would allow victims of gun violence to sue firearms manufacturers. So Nick Suplina is the managing director for law and policy at Everytown. He joins us now to dig a little deeper into New York's plan to combat gun violence. So Nick, this is good news. Usually a declaration like this certainly means more money, but the money has to be spent in the right way, in the right places to really make any sort of change. So what exactly will change with the emergency declaration under this new legislation?
Yeah, well, for one, the thing that will change is how we are addressing gun violence in the state. It's really important that the governor's plan, in response to community demands, in response to advocates and law enforcement who are all clamoring for action here, the most important thing is that it takes a whole of government approach. It doesn't just focus on one aspect of combating gun violence, but really takes a holistic approach that pulls on a number of levers. And that's the biggest and most important part about this, a public health approach to gun violence. So that is an important part of the declaration. Of course, there's practical components of it as well. Freeing up money and making sure it goes to the right place will be the next item on the to-do list. But the most important thing, and you're absolutely right, it's hard to celebrate such a difficult moment for the state and for the country, but we can celebrate that we're off to a very good start in how we're approaching it here in New York.
So what would you say to Republican lawmakers in New York who oppose this legislation and believe the state's bail reform laws are to blame for the increases in crime and gun violence?
Well, I'd say show me the evidence, because there really is no evidence that things like bail reform or other contemplated changes in our criminal justice system are responsible. Gun violence and gun violence exclusively is up across the country, including in places that had no bail reform or haven't undertaken any other criminal justice reform. The fact is that we have just coming out of, hopefully, a global pandemic that exacerbated the underlying causes of gun violence in New York and elsewhere across the country. The economic stresses of that epidemic, the social uncertainty and stress related to that, the fact that children haven't been in school for months and months, and summer programs have been abruptly canceled. These are the drivers of the spike in gun violence, not a change in law that occurred in one or two places in the last year. So we follow the evidence, we look for the solutions to gun violence that work, and we look for the causes that we know are driving the gun violence spike across the country.
So often New York is a leader when it comes to this sort of stuff. Now there are activists in Chicago that are calling on Illinois' governor to do the same thing, declare gun violence an emergency in that state. Have you heard conversations, perhaps from, activists in other states that are hopeful that maybe this will be the first state of many that will try to approach gun violence as a public health issue?
Yes, from all across the country, those on the ground working to stop the cycle of violence in communities, to policy experts, a public health approach to gun violence, an all levers approach is the only way to address a complex problem. It needs comprehensive solutions. And if you're hearing from anybody that says there's one cause or one solution, they're probably selling something or trying to score political points. Chicago, like other cities, and advocates on the ground there have been calling for a similar response to that in New York, because it's the right way to approach this problem. And we need the law enforcement component, the anti-trafficking component of both the governor's announcement this week, Chicago is a city where the guns are not starting in Chicago, but they're making it their way into Chicago. We need to deal with the economic components of this, an opportunity for young people at risk, young people in particular, to steer them in the right direction. And so many other factors that go into preventing gun violence by addressing some of the root causes of gun violence while also dealing with the urgent summer that we're facing right now.
So President Biden's nominee for ATF Director, David Chipman, faces a full Senate confirmation vote. There are several pro-gun organizations, as you know, that are opposing his appointment. Give us a sense of what their concerns are.
Well, many friends of the gun lobby have said for years, we don't need new laws. We just need to enforce the ones we have. We've heard that time and time again. And yet they're opposing confirmation of ATF Director, the agency that is, in fact, in charge of enforcing our nation's gun laws. So I think mostly what they are saying is they don't want an ATF Director. We haven't had a Senate-confirmed ATF Director since 2015. David Chipman is uniquely qualified for this job. He has 25 years of law enforcement ATF experience. He understands the agency. He understands the regulatory components of the agency, which are so important in stemming the flow of illegal guns from legal to illegal uses. They are afraid of a strong ATF Director, in part because they have been very successful for the last 20 years, making sure this really important agency doesn't have the funding it needs, doesn't do its job as well as it could. And so they're opposing David Chipman, not on the merits, but on the fact that they don't want to be regulated. We need ATF Director, we need David Chipman in order to enforce the laws that are on the books.
All right. Nick Suplina, thank you very much. As always, we appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to see you.